All right.
Check
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are waiting just another moment. We had some technical difficulties to see if we can get another couple of our board members into the session. So if you can give us a moment, I apologize for the delay.
We do have a couple of board members, Simha, in the attendee section. Once this stops loading in, I will promote those folks to panelists and we can get going.
Great, really appreciate it. All right, Sean, you just let me know when we're ready.
Just doing one more quick scroll through, but I think I've promoted all board members that were in the lobby to panelists. I think we can get going soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, welcome, everyone. I now call this regular meeting, the December 14th KCRHA Implementation Board meeting to order. I'd like to start by grounding our work in our theory of change, which is that if we create a homeless response system that centers people with lived experience, then we will be able to focus on responding to needs and eliminating inequities in order to end homelessness for all. This is a hybrid meeting, so there's physical location as well as virtual access. And I want to thank Mayor Nancy Bacchus and the City of Auburn again for letting us borrow their chambers today. Sharon Lee, please take the roll.
Yes. Okesha Brandon.
That's Okesha.
I apologize for that.
No worries. I see that Okesha is here on the panel, but
Yes.
there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Chelniak.
I'm here.
Gordon McHenry. Sarah Rankin.
Here.
Juanita Spotted Elk. Christopher Ross.
Here.
Benjamin Merritts.
Here.
Nate Caminos.
Here.
Michael Ramos.
Here.
Damian Patnod.
Here.
Paula Carvalho.
She has an excused absence today.
Pastor Carrie Anderson.
Here, thank you.
And Simha Reddy.
Present.
And so we do have a good quorum, Chair.
All right. Thank you. We have quorum, and I received a notice from Gordon McHenry. He'll be joining us shortly. Next, we acknowledge that King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor this land and its people, past and present, and we are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous people. At every meeting, we reserve time for public comment. And if you'd like to provide comment, please add your name and the city you're from to the chat now. And Sean will call on you in order after our board announcements. And I want to thank the people who've already begun signing up. Appreciate it. Right. Just before we get to public comment, I just want to take a moment to review our agenda for today. First, we're going to have a presentation from our RHA staff on the 5-year plan, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss the plan as a group. After that, we'll briefly review and vote on acceptance of the final budget for 2023. As you'll recall, we submitted a budget proposal in the spring. We've now received the final contributions from the City of Seattle and King County. To ensure we have sufficient time for discussion around the plan, however, I'm going to ask the board for a voice vote right now to extend our meeting time by half an hour up until 4:30, just in case that extra time is required. It's a comprehensive presentation on the 5-year plan, and I want to make sure that we have that chance to talk fully.
So this is John. I'll move to extend the meeting to 4:30.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right, the motion to extend to 4:30 p.m. is approved. Thank you. Thank you, board. All right, we now have up to 10 minutes for public comment. If you wish to come and you haven't already added your name and city to the chat box or signed up in person, please do so now. Each person will have up to 2 minutes to comment, and we ask that the comments be related to today's agenda. Again, this 5-year plan, budget. We will start with the people on Zoom and then move to the people in the room, if there are any. Public comment is now open. Sean, would you please call on people for public comment?
Sure. So first up is Jeff Keenan.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Keenan. I'm a Seattle resident. Some of you are already familiar with me by way of my distribution of a monthly real-time proof of concept dashboard that reports the current and projected at minimum unit gaps for permanent supportive housing across King County and for each subregion. In prep for today's meeting, I reviewed the materials posted yesterday on the committee's website, including the 5-year plan overview December 2022 that's being presented by Owen and Alexis shortly. I actually have a lot of questions on that overview document, but I'll start by just posing the following 3. I formulated these questions from the perspective of, if I were an implementation committee member, what is it that I'd want to know before I would be ready and sufficiently informed to be able to approve any 5-year plan and/or its corresponding budget? The first question is, if this 5-year plan slide deck represents just an overview, is there a corresponding 5-year plan working document, and can I get a copy, that provides the committee and the public with a substantive, specific, detailed, fully time horizoned, and target quantified 5-year implementation plan that will be managed to and diligently utilized to accomplish the 5-year plan? In essence, a document that details how we're going to operationalize for the next 5 years. The second question would be, where are all of the monthly, quarterly, and annual targets that we'll be measuring, reporting, and managing performance to across all 7 areas outlined in that overview, as well as how soon will you begin reporting on the performance to those targets to this committee on a regular and consistent cadence, preferably at every committee meeting. The third and final question would be, what's the date for having the complete, comprehensive, and countywide implementation of KCRHA's version of the by name list data methodology? And how close to real-time data will that initially be? What is the target for getting it to be a fully realized real-time visibility? And when will that data begin populating the management metrics that we need to fully achieve desired outcome targets and goals? Thanks for your time and consideration of those questions.
Thank you. And then next up, I have Marissa Gaston.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm Marissa Gaston, Chief of Staff with We Heart Seattle. We Heart, myself and my colleagues are really excited to be joining you for this meeting. We really celebrate that we have opportunities to collaborate coming up. We are looking forward to our January 4th meeting. We have been boots on the ground for over 2 years. We have a robust amount of data that we would love to share with you and then cross-pollinate wherever possible. And just generally really look forward to opportunities for us to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next up, we have Sharon Lee.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sharon Lee, and I'm the Executive Director of Low Income Housing Institute, or LEHI. Thank you for this opportunity. First, I want to talk about the 5-year plan because it states that the need for new temporary emergency shelter to be built over the next 5 years is a staggering 18,000 units. But the draft plan states the need for tiny houses will be just 2% of the total. So if we understand this right, that's 460 tiny houses, fewer than what we provide currently in Seattle and King County. As the plan develops, we'd like to see a much more ambitious target for tiny houses over the next 5 years. Tiny houses are in high demand, they're cost effective, and have been shown to have high rates of successful exits to permanent housing. We think this is a serious policy issue that the implementation board needs to put their stamp on in terms of supporting tiny houses. Second, in terms of the 5-year plan, I think I'd like to see some recommendations regarding RHA's severe cold weather response system. This is based on our recent experience partnering with RHA during the past few weeks and our experience with severe weather shelters over the past years. We can all agree that RHA needs to stand up a much more robust cold weather system. I don't think we can just have RHA rely on a patchwork of shelters assembled at the last minute every time there is cold or severe weather. We can't just keep opening and closing shelters depending on the weather. It's not an effective strategy. A robust cold weather response system should include these elements: a budget, a specific budget for cold weather response. The Housing Command Center could be repurposed during weather emergencies. And we think that the shelters should be open 24/7 all winter from November through March. And it's very important to have outreach workers. Right now, we do not have outreach workers that work evenings after 4:30 or
Sharon,
weekends.
we're at time. Thank you for comment.
Thank you.
And then next I have Andrea Suarez. I'm trying to find you to promote you to be able to speak. 1 second. I'm so sorry. Oh, it's under We Heart Seattle. That's why. Go ahead, please, Andrea.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Thumbs up.
Yes.
Somebody, okay, great. Thank you. My name is Andrea Suarez, founder of We Heart Seattle, a 2-year-old private funded grassroots movement for a more beautiful and safe Seattle. Our organization is excited to be here and hopefully become regulars here for public comment and collaboration. In review of the budget, I guess I would like to see overall more detail on the breaking out of some of the staffing line items. Some of my experience is that there's a lot of housing, a lot of shelter, a lot of tiny homes. We need more, of course, but I think if we staffed and did programming to graduate people through those existing transitional programs at a faster rate, we would free up more beds for the next cycle of people that need access to that 24/7 enhanced. I'd like to see this budget go towards recovery. I didn't see a lot of that in here, except mentioned at the very bottom of one of the slides. My experience within the encampments, for those of you that don't know, we provide waste management as a form of harm reduction in the field, turbocharged by hundreds of volunteers that come out every weekend. And, you know, we see that this is a untreated mental illness and substance abuse, and hope to see that in your budget, you're creating more dollars allocated towards recovery housing, treatment, programming that helps people reach self-sufficiency at a higher rate, especially with recent statistics being that 77% of all overdoses are happening indoors. And so without line items for drug and alcohol counseling or required programming, I would have concern with the success of this budget in the 5-year program. If I was in charge of it, I would hire a very highly commissioned HR executive to fill these existing open positions with people that you hire first for passion, second for experience, third for education. Fill those positions and process people through these transitional housing projects faster. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next up, we have Mike Matthias.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Mike Matthias. Thanks for having me here. I'm with Anything Helps. We're an outreach organization providing outreach to unsheltered individuals in North Seattle at the moment. I'm here to elevate a need for inclement weather response. The city of Seattle seems to not want to coordinate with the KCRHA in terms of opening the community centers in the North region. There's not been a lot of coordination or communication from Human Services on that issue. Those community centers provide the North region with a maximum of 300 beds in terms of occupancy during inclement weather. Right now, there's a small church in North Seattle, St. Dunstan's, and Lehigh has stepped up to provide 20 beds in that region as well. But in total, at the very maximum, we're seeing maybe 50 beds in the North region. And when I say the North region, I mean anywhere from 85th to 145th. We know at least 78 people out there by name that need those beds every night that get turned away because these locations are at occupancy. Homelessness is a matter of familiarity in terms of safety, so people don't like to leave their region, even if it means an immense amount of suffering. So I feel like it's really important that we try to necessitate whatever it takes to get those community centers open. But that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you. And Chair Reddy, we are at the 10-minute mark with 3 folks still left signed up for public comments. How would you like to proceed?
I'd like to go, those people who are signed up, I'd like to go and receive their comment. I think
Great.
it's important.
So next up then is going to be Sarah Robbins. But again, not seeing that name in the chat. Coalition on Homelessness for public comment.
It'll be listed as Coalition on Homelessness.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Robbins. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. Our coalition mobilizes our community to challenge systemic causes of homelessness and advocate for housing justice. Part of that mobilization is securing resources from both the City of Seattle and King County that make up a portion of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority's budget, which we did very successfully this past budget session, both in the city and the county. We've been waiting for an opportunity to review the final King County Regional Homelessness Authority's 2023 budget. The current 23 budget proposal was just posted, I believe, yesterday. I had been checking it over the last week, which did not give us as community partners or others in the public adequate time to review and ask questions, both of the RHA staff and board members. So we would ask you to take this into consideration as you think about your time frame for approval at this meeting or potentially in January. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Beth Manil.
Thank you very much. And thank you for extending the time for the additional comments. My name is Beth Manil. I'm on the Queen Anne Community Council and also on the board of We Heart Seattle. I'll keep my comments very brief. I would reiterate the comments from Jeff Keenan, which was the first public speaker with his request for more information on the operational impacts of the budget and some of the metrics that are going to be used. Secondly, I did notice in the budget that there's a line item for behavioral health in one particular area in Seattle, and We Heart Seattle does believe that behavioral health resources are critical throughout the entire city. And then thirdly, we noticed a line item for, it's a very small line item, but it's still important for funding resources for smaller providers. And I would urge you to consider that maybe non-contracted providers should also be considered. There are an enormous number of nonprofits in the area, and this is kind of like low-hanging fruit. Doesn't even cost money to encourage collaboration and best practices sharing. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. And then next up is Shanae Colston.
Thank you. So as some of you may know, I'm the co-chair of the COC Policy Advisory Committee. I also sit on the leadership team of the LEC. Today, I'm not here representing any of those, but more as a consumer of the same services that I provide. So last time I was here, I asked you guys in regards to check into the equity and the abilities in the point in time count. And that has yet to be done, meaning that the person that we hired, the person who carried out that information for KCRHA did so without, again, us knowing the transparency of why they were hired and how they were doing and what algorithm. How that relates today is because that same questioning comes into play when they're presenting this 5-year plan to us. They're using that 2022 point in time count that people are questioning is inaccurate in the first place. So when we're now being presented with this 5-year plan, again, those questions of who did this, how they came up with these numbers, what algorithm was used, how they went about in obtaining that information from the people who live that life is all miscrewed. And so I'm just concerned that this is now public information, again, without those checks and balances. And now we're presenting this 5-year plan as like, hey, this is our vision. And yet the information and data that we're using is not accurate. And so I'm just questioning that when we're about to go into this detail. We've been hosting these these questions, feedback, things with this same script of Alexis and others from KCRHA representing that and presenting those same slideshow. And it, like I said, it's posted, and yet that information seems not to be truthful, accurate, or transparent in how we even got those numbers. So that's still highly concerning. It still hasn't been questioned. And now we're basing, again, our information in this vision. It's a great vision, but when that vision is misconstrued with misinformation, it's not helpful for anybody involved. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I did not see anybody signed up or in person at Auburn City Hall. Chair ready. So that concludes public comment.
All right, thank you. So public comment is now closed, and I want to take a moment to thank Sinead, to everyone else who provided comment this afternoon for us. Next, we're going to move on to the 5-year plan. A little bit of context. Over the summer and fall, building off the regional action plan, using the theory of change, KCRHA staff engaged with hundreds of people currently living homeless and with providers, community members, other stakeholders. They worked closely with us on the board, kept going back to the community for feedback to get to the approach you'll see presented today. 2 main themes. First, to get everyone to safety, we need to expand our temporary housing options. This means both in scale and in type, and you'll see what that looks like. We need to have a portfolio of temporary housing options that people will use because it actually meets their needs. Second main theme, the system we currently have is chaotic. I think most of us would agree with that. It's barely held together by people trying their hardest. And our job at KCRHA is to get us all organized and to remove the kind of friction that we see now. And you'll see a combination of initiatives and new metrics across the system that will hopefully help us both get there and get to a path of continual improvement. So because the presentation is lengthy, I'm going to ask our board members for the following indulgence. So if you have clarifying questions along the way, I'm going to ask that you please type it into the chat, to the public chat open to everyone. If it's a straightforward question, Alexis or Owen will respond in the chat. And at the end of the presentation, I'll read those out loud briefly for the people who are calling in and unable to see the chat. And then we can launch into a broader discussion about the plan. Of course, if you feel a need to step in the moment and comment, and we'll of course recognize any board member. All right. And to make sure that we have enough time to discuss the budget and get to a vote, I'm going to call a hard stop at 3:45. So it gives us an hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to turn it over now to Alexis and Owen. And Alexis, Owen, if you'd like to take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, my name is Alexis Mercedes Rink. I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to get the screen share going and just kind of get us rolling. I know I've come before this board a couple of times over the past couple of months to talk about our progress in the 5-year plan and have been in conversation with you all, but leaning into what we've discussed, wanting to use this as an opportunity to share broadly with the public the work and the frame of the 5-year plan and the content developed to date, knowing that there is a lot to cover today and wanting to acknowledge that there's just a lot and wanting to get into as much detail as we can in the time that we have available. Oh, and before we get going, do you want to introduce yourself?
Happily. Hey, everyone. My name is Owen Kafis. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Acting Chief Community Impact Officer at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And apologies, I'm having some trouble with my video. Oh, now it's working as soon as I say that. So happy to be with you all today.
Thank you so much. So we'll get started. So our 5-year plan is our shared roadmap to transform the system. And so we are really regarding what we're putting forward to you all. This is an evidence-based, data-driven tool to align our work and decision-making in service of our neighbors experiencing homelessness in our community as a whole. And you will notice in today's presentation, Owen and I will be tagged to me. So I'm going to tag it over to him to carry us through the next couple of slides.
Thank you. I was right about my camera not working, so apologies. But what you'll see here is that we are estimating that there's about 62,000 people who experienced homelessness at least once in 2022 in King County. This is based off of a methodology that was developed using HMIS data as the basis for a count of how many people are experiencing homelessness. This is a methodology, and we'll go more into it a little bit later on in terms of all of the different housing parts, but just want to be really clear that this is a methodology that was stood up on a state level in order to make sure that all counties across the state of Washington are planning from a similar methodology. And so the utilization of the HMIS as the basis for that with a scaling factor was one of the key pieces there. Just want to lift that up to begin with. Thanks, Alexis. It's important to note that not all of these experiences are unsheltered. Our modeling indicates that we must rapidly scale on our shelter system or our emergency housing system in order to end unsheltered homelessness for about 23,000 people per year over the next 5 years. Next. This is, while our modeling that we worked with is not based on our point in time count from 2022, do want to lift up the information from our 2022 point in time count to indicate that much of the disparities that we have seen in our system year over year and that our community regularly lifts up are present. And this is a place that we are trying our best in order to solve around in our plan with special callouts in there around certain intervention areas. Thank you. Key piece with this is just calling out that you may have noticed that difference between that 62,000 number and then the temporary housing number that we put forward in the previous slides, recognizing that this is a solution that will take all of us. There are certain components that the RHA will definitely be leading on and certain components where we will need to be activating additional community resources. So what we'll walk through today, we're gonna get grounded really in the KCRHA's role in this work. We'll go through a little bit of an overview of how we got to where we are currently. We'll dive into the different components of the 5-year plan, provide high-level timeline for review, approval, and rollout, and then get into some next steps. And I'll pass that back over to Alexis.
Wonderful. So I'm going to take us into our role as a refresher. So the King County Regional Homeless Authority was established to lead a unified approach to dramatically reduce the number of people, the number of unsheltered people in our communities. And so our core role, and just to reiterate what the board chair voiced at the top of the meeting, we do see and have heard from our unhoused neighbors of how the experience of homelessness, currently accessing services, the system feels chaotic, unsafe, polarized, and can be limited in what can be achieved. And as we move towards a future state, especially through this plan, we are looking at building a system that is a single, efficient, successful system broadly that has affordable housing for all with accessible, high quality services on demand countywide. And so our community has long known the solutions to homelessness. I think even in the past week of engaging with partners and talking through elements of the plan, I think we've all been familiar with previous plans to address homelessness, and we've really done our due diligence to read through, honor, and build upon what previous plans have stated, in acknowledgement that we know that a lot of effort has gone into identifying the core needs, and now that we've really done this work, we need to act on what we know works at an even greater scale. And so our agency, we offer infrastructure, coordination, and centralization of resources to make that work possible. And so a bit about how we got here. As a refresher to the public, important to take us back to 2019. That was when the National Innovation Service report was conducted and completed, where it identified 10 action steps to fundamentally change homelessness response services and the system. One of the key recommendations that came out of that report was to establish a centralized regional authority to lead in centralizing decision-making, funding, oversight, and data. There were also recommendations in there related to the development of a funders collaborative, really exploring person-centered design and improving accountability to people experiencing homelessness. And that fed into the creation of the interlocal agreement, which established the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, formally unifying funding from Seattle and King County, while also defining our guiding principles and solidifying the theory of change around living into and honoring, centering voices of those with lived experience. Throughout that time, the Regional Action Framework was also being developed and was completed and launched in 2020. There were 4 focal points of the Regional Action Framework that we wanted to elevate here today, and looking at first, establishing regional coordination and collaboration. The second, highlighting the need for affordable and supportive housing. The third area, focusing in on crisis response. This is really the lane in which KCRHA occupies. And then the fourth area related to systems and services. So our system partners looking at healthcare, justice, and the social safety net. And so as we've been moving towards the development of the 5-year plan, we've been doing our best to build upon the previous planning efforts, and acknowledgement that a lot had been articulated in those efforts, and we wanted to bolster, but also circle back with community, especially as much has changed since the COVID-19 pandemic, and wanting to reaffirm and better understand what are our community as urgent needs that we're identifying. And so through sub-regional planning efforts, 38 workshops over the summer, and then the most recent focus on subpopulations in the fall, we have an estimated reach and engaging over 1,000 different folks around the county to be building in and forming this plan. And so what we're bringing before you today are the 7 strategies, the 7 goals, and supporting strategies that get really clear and build upon all that previous work that has been done. And as a refresher, in tandem, while we've been doing this work and developing the plan, we've also made tremendous progress to date beyond just system stand-up, but also improving improving data systems and living into our theory of change, and also successfully supporting housing folks. And so want to elevate the interviews that we did and the lived experience narratives we learned with 670 people living unsheltered around the region, elevating that also through the emergency housing voucher program, which has reached almost near full utilization rate with the lease up rates, nearly twice that of our peer communities. I believe we're at a lease up rate as of last week of 94%, meaning that about 1,200 households were housed in partnership between us, our regional service providers, and the local housing authorities. We've also strengthened our oversight and performance monitoring. Over 4,000 households have moved inside. We've been resolving a number of encampments and setting up the Housing Command Center to streamline the actions needed to house people, and working on improving our severe weather response. We'll touch on a bit more in severe weather that is touched on in the plan, but want to elevate as we move into a very frigid weekend. Our agency has been in some type of posture related to severe weather response over 50 days in less than a year. And so this is continuing to be a urgent part of our work, and something that we are working on improving. And so the 5-year plan, taking us into what we do know. Housing is the solution to homelessness. We also know that the path to housing is different for each of our community members based on their identities and their experiences. And so when we look at our core principles that guide the plan, we have three. We root this plan in knowing that homelessness is solvable, and solving it comes by centering the voices of those who have been unsheltered, while also applying our principles of equity and social justice so our solutions benefit everybody. Our roadmap centers on 7 goals. We first have dramatically reduce unsheltered homelessness. The second is to restructure our service system to improve capacity, supports, and efficiency. The third is delivering accessible, accountable, and responsive services. The fourth is reducing the impact of racism on people experiencing homelessness. Our fifth is no family with children is sleeping outside. The sixth is every unaccompanied youth and young adult has a home. And the seventh is our region acts as one to address homelessness, knowing that we need to be moving forward together. So taking us to our first goal area, to dramatically reduce unsheltered homelessness, we need to be expanding temporary and permanent housing options to meet our community's needs, and then improving housing and supports for individuals with our most significant needs, assessing and updating our existing infrastructure, and scaling up Partnership for Zero to achieve functional zero. And I believe with this next slide, I am passing it over to Owen.
Thanks, Alexis. So earlier I talked about the modeling that was happening at the state level in order to have a better understanding of what is necessary to end homelessness in each county. We retained services with a group that did that work at the state level, Cloudburst, in order to build that model into more detail for our work for the 5-year plan. And a culmination of that is what you see in front of you today and parts of what I'll be walking through. This, in alignment with our 5-year plan, was looking at what is needed by 2027 to make significant impact or end homelessness in Keenan County. What you'll notice here is that on the left, when we're looking at these units, and these units are based off of household need, we're seeing a huge number that we need to actually be planning and implementing, both for temporary housing options and permanent housing options. And our stock compared to that at the moment in terms of what is usable or could bring additional people inside is quite small. So what we are hyper focused on in this section, and number one, is to figure out how do we actually plan and move on this gap. So like I just said, our current housing gap is significant. Again, modeling shows that the system must increase capacity to temporarily house about 23,000 people every year over the next 5 years. And our community could make that not necessary if we were able to scale and sustain permanent housing options for people much faster than we currently do. It is the lack of permanent housing, and again, harkening back to a slide Alexis was talking about, knowing that housing is the solution to homelessness. It's the lack of that housing that is driving this. And if we do not actually build on the level necessary, we will have to sustain a large level of infrastructure currently and in the future for temporary housing alone. Next, please. So temporary housing options. In our work that we did with Cloudburst, we partnered with a number of folks from the Lived Experience Coalition to look at the interviews that we collected during our Understanding Unsheltered Homeless project in the fall in order to have a better understanding of what is necessary within each of these different larger housing types of temporary housing and permanent housing. Based off of coding those interviews and weekly check-ins with a group of folks from the Lived Experience Coalition, we were able to identify these as necessary temporary housing options across our system. One being recovery housing. So this is for people with substance use disorders or needs for substance use. So really focusing on harm reduction, treatment for folks, recovery support, and ensuring that there are options for folks for sober living. We also had recuperative housing. So this provides ongoing healthcare supports for folks who have acute needs and reduces emergency room visits. So that's giving direct medical support to people in a temporary location. We also have micro modular shelter. So what is very present in our community is tiny home villages and pallet shelters. So that does make up a component of it. And then we have emergency housing. So or what is sometimes referred to as non-congregate small scale shelter. And so that is looking at non-congregate emergency housing locations that are really focused on privacy and dignity. I think you all have heard Mark say this again and again, but when we are standing up spaces, we need to make sure that the physical space is therapeutic for people and actually healing. We also know that we have a need for safe parking in our response. We separated this out into two separate versions of it. So vehicle residency or safe parking connected to services for people who are living in cars and trucks. And then we have RV parking, which is more specific around folks who actually have an RV, making sure that it is connected to services on site, but also ensuring that we are able to connect people directly to utilities in those locations. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown of the temporary housing projected need. The way that this was broken down was looking at frequency of what we were seeing in those interviews and information we were seeing in HMIS in order to get a better understanding of our need when we scale to that about 23,000 number. What does that breakdown need to be by each of those different types? So in emergency housing, we're seeing about 23%, tiny houses about 0.5%, RV safe parking 3.8%, vehicle safe parking 7.9%, substance use recovery 3.1%, and medical recuperation 4.7%. You might be looking at this and saying like, hey, pie charts usually have a full circle. This does get overlaid with our permanent housing solutions later on, so that will complete the pie in a moment. Next, please. Wonderful. We also know that as we will continuously hit home, that permanent housing is the solution to homelessness. And we need to make sure that there are diverse ways for people to come inside permanently. Often our community continuously looks at permanent supportive housing, which we do need to scale. But there are other areas that we need to be looking at that better meet individuals' needs. In permanent supportive housing, of course, we have comprehensive support services. We also know that there needs to be opportunity for long-term care. So for folks who are elderly or disabled who will need ongoing intensive care, that we need to identify places where they can have assistance with daily living. This is generally more supportive than permanent supportive housing and requires a different staffing model in facilities. Supported employment. So one of the things that we saw particularly in our interviews is a number of people, or a large number of people, really wanting to get connected and supported in finding and sustaining work so that we can do in-depth job training and placement. People are really interested in that, and potential housing subsidy attached with that so that people are able to move inside and self-sustain in the future. We have shared housing. So this is an area that is how many people who are across the city are using regularly, which is voluntarily living with a roommate and having that matching situation to decrease the cost of rent of market rate rent. We have voucher bridge. The idea here is that we would be looking at helping to close the gap between what a voucher is able to pay for somebody and market rent. We also know that we need to scale RVs parking so that it's not just a temporary location, but can be a permanent location for folks, as this provides low cost of housing and often just needs a good connection to services and utilities. Over on the right, we also have Market housing. So this is looking at typical rentals without specialized services. And then shallow subsidies. So fixed funding for a percentage of rent in order to help people meet the gap between their incomes and what market rate rent is. One of the pieces with that is it would be looking at voluntary service connection as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's that full pie chart from earlier. So building on that temporary housing component, we also are needing to scale at this level for the permanent housing. And this has a breakdown of what those different components could look like based off of, again, the data that we are seeing in frequency in our interviews and also in HMIS data. So permanent supportive housing at 10.3%, long-term care at 1.1%, supported employment at 7.2%, shallow subsidy at 10.7%, RV park at about 0.7%, shared / communal housing, so that's that roommating situation at just under 1% at 0.9%, voucher bridge at about 0.5%, and then affordable community housing at 25.6%. Next slide, please. So to get to some of the questions that were asked earlier, how are we measuring success against this? In order to measure progress on whether we are dramatically reducing unsheltered homelessness, we need to be counting the number of people experiencing homelessness, particularly those who are living unsheltered. Doing that in a time series over the years that this plan is in action. We also need to be directly looking at how we are scaling the temporary and permanent housing units compared to the need that we've identified in this modeling. We have to look at the number of services, programs, and physical facilities, specifically for high acuity individuals. So people who have complex multi-service needs. And then we, hearkening back to one of the ideas of scaling Partnership for Zero, we'll be looking at the number of communities in Partnership for Zero and the total number of people that that model houses. And I think that passes it back to Alexis to
It does. Thank you, Owen. Thank you so much, Owen. So taking us to our second goal area, we have restructure the service system to improve capacity, supports, and efficiency. And underneath this goal area, we have actions such as scaling prevention and diversion to reduce inflow, optimizing our funding for services and operations. When we're talking about this, we're looking at ways that we can better tap into and leverage federal resources while also exploring state level opportunities and working with local partners. When we're looking at better leveraging federal resources, looking at things such as increasing billing for foundational community supports, also known as Medicaid billing and so on, just to give you a flavor of what we're talking about when we say that. Also within this, we have support for our frontline workers and stabilizing the workforce. This was something that we heard across the board throughout our summer of engagement and frankly, just the past year, the need to support frontline staff is critical to carry out services. And it's the morally just thing also to do. And so also looking at redesigning our outreach services to ensure that we are ensuring geographic coverage across the entire county and serving the to those who need it most and improving our coordination while also improving our severe weather responses. As was elevated in public comment, we have much growth and work to do in improving how we conduct our severe weather response. And then further looking at how we grow and diversify our portfolio of service providers. So working to build capacity building with smaller provider agencies, as well as agencies that are staffed by serving and led by Black, Indigenous folks of color, as well as looking at other service providers that serve specific subpopulations that are disproportionately impacted, such as people living with disabilities and LGBTQIA two-spirit. Lastly, also within here, we have standardizing and supporting our person-centered healing-based practices. And so a lot of the engagement, especially over the past couple of months as we've been undergoing some population-specific engagement, has actually been exploring what do we mean when we say standardizing and supporting person-centered care and getting very clear and specific around what are kind of the trainings, what are the changes that need to happen within programs in order to actually live into that when it comes to addressing the needs of survivors, people living with disabilities, veterans, people exiting incarceration, and so on. Also within this, we have some initiatives related to onlining a training academy to make training easily accessible to our service provider community and community at large. And so just to hone in on a couple more pieces underneath this goal area, when it comes to prevention and diversion, one of the most effective ways to address homelessness is to end it before it begins. And so with flexible diversion and prevention funding, if that were available, we would be able to divert over 1,000 households each year from homelessness. And tied to this, I spoke a little bit earlier on our severe weather response, but continuing to address severe weather will be a top priority again, as we've had more than 50 days as an agency of being in an activated posture in relationship to events. we have a tremendous need for a real regional response that is coordinated and also meets folks where they're at. So tailoring our approaches and trying new things and just doing things differently than they have been done. And we've started to incorporate some of those practices by adjusting our threshold levels, but also being able to change some other protocols and practices as we work with other regional partners. Further, we must continue to support our frontline workers, as this graph demonstrates when we look at our King County median household income as an hourly wage and then compare to the hourly wages of direct service frontline workers, case managers. That math does not math. And it's a quite stark difference, which does result in real issues, as we've seen in our field, in terms of our ability to fully staff up at agencies, but also just wanting to ensure that frontline workers who are carrying out the critical work are able to live healthy, happy lives within King County as well. And so that is something that is included within this section as well. And so how we'll be measuring our progress as we're looking at restructuring our service system, we'll be looking at proportion of households seeking diversion and prevention assistance and the numbers successfully diverted from homelessness. We'll be looking at comparing our frontline staff base pay to the cost of a 1-bedroom unit within King County, while also consistently monitoring the percentage of contracted organizations that are buy-for equity programs. So and by buy-for equity programs, meaning organizations and programs that are staffed by and serving. So consistently evaluating how much of the portfolio is held by those organizations. Looking also at the number of providers that are receiving trainings that are person-centered and healing-based practices. Further looking at our utilization of severe weather response mechanisms, as we've been looking at emergency funds, shelter-in-place supplies, but also the expanded capacity shelters, and increasing our severe weather response options across the county. So further supporting severe weather response all around the region. Lastly, evaluating for our percentage change in funding across time when we look at federal, state, local, and then private and philanthropic investments. That's goal area 2. And as we go into goal area 3, delivering accessible, accountable, and responsive services. Underneath this section, we really have initiatives related to developing and refining the Ombuds Office to ensure that our services are accountable to people experiencing homelessness. Further developing continuous feedback channels for program participants through web and mobile. So being able to offer that opportunity and pathway for folks to be able to share their experience while they're accessing services, while also developing a process for participants to control and manage their own personal data through HMIS, and then supporting that real-time information on resource availability as well. So this goal area really has everything to do with accountability and improving data and accessibility across the board. So what do responsive services look like? Partnering more closely with 211 to ensure that we're all reading from the same script and sharing the exact same information, that all information is up to date and accurate, while also improving how online platforms could be used, really centering that user-centered design. So we're developing resources that center the needs and desires of those who are going to be using them. And then continually monitoring and improving our systems. And so how we'll be measuring our progress on delivering on these pieces is really looking at honing in on Ombuds investigation outcomes, both in terms of the demographics of those that may be filing grievances, but also the outcomes of those reported grievances with an eye towards equity. Regular updates of the King County Regional Homeless Authority Regional Services Database, which went live just a few weeks ago. Would love if somebody could put it in the chat to make sure